How was the tasting?
It was food. It was good.
Right. Okay. Well, my name's Doug Frost. I don't know how many were at the Bloggers Conference last year. So, okay. So you don't need an introduction to me. That's fine. I'm a whiny idiot from Kansas City. Let's leave it at that. We already heard those who were here there last year already heard my mea culpas, confessions, and apologies. So none of those are further needed. Instead, what I will say is, since we're going to be tasting wine and we're going to be tasting Rioja, I wanted to talk about Rioja as a place and try to put these things in perspective. We're talking about Bodegas LAN, and I would start you off by saying, okay, hashtag Bodegas LAN. You are welcome to, I don't know, I sent out the hashtag about 3 days ago. Hashtag, no more hashtags. Hasn't taken off. I don't know.
No?
I know, exactly. Hashtag, no hashtag. Come on, no more. Oh, well. Anyway, so please feel free to do that, and feel free to other things to feel free about. I'm going to try super hard not to make any political comments today. I don't think it's going to work. Because I was about to say, feel free to do 2 other things, but soon feel free to do nothing else ever again. Anyway, sorry. Deep breaths. What I was going to say is, 1, ask any questions you want. Interrupt at any moment if you have a question you want to bring up a topic of discussion, because we're a small enough group that we can actually do that. 2, drink the wines. There are spit buckets there, but I don't, those of you who know me know, I don't like to do the sort of lead tasting where it's like you pick up this glass, oh, you'll notice the cherry in this glass, and then you go to number 2 and you'll notice, oh, there's cherry in that one too, because there's cherry in all red wines, okay? Which is, stop me if you've heard this before, but it is the thing that I always think is important to teach people, that there's cherry in all red wines, there's apple, probably lemon in all white wines, so the next time some asshole hands you a glass of wine and says, well, what do you think of those? That's when you do and then you look far away as if you're studying the top of a mountain. You say it's cherry. It's definitely very cherry. Like, oh my God, that's amazing. You've been studying this so long, haven't you? It's like, yeah. Anyway, so the other thing is, like I say, is I don't like to lead tastings because I like everybody to taste at their own pace, taste as they wish, and then we'll double back and talk about what we think of the wines and who went to double back, as long as I said that word inadvertently. Nice wines, eh? Even better view, eh? That was stupid. Yeah. You ever been there? Go check it out. Of course, on a rainy day, maybe not so much, but the blues are beautiful. And do the tasting thing. You do the tasting thing, I'll do the talking thing, because I can't heck myself. I wanted to talk a little bit about, I'm going to slide through now and again, Mike, sorry. I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of the history of Spanish wine, if I might, and put this in perspective while you taste these Bodegas LAN wines. And in so doing, I guess what I'm trying to do is explain why these wines exist. Because each of these wines, to me, each of these individual bottles exists for, if you will, a different purpose, has a different historical moment that it references, really. And let me explain why. First off, Spain. Who's been to Spain? Okay, everybody else hates us, those Super Extra games.
That's true.
You should go, and you're like, I know, I will, one of these days. But the thing about Spain is, if your recollection of Spain is really just, the hot, sunny beaches off to the, Costa del Sol, and then your memories, like mine, are haunted by the nude beaches, because there is a rule about the people who are naked on nude beaches really are the ones who should not be. It's just like, and even the guy with the Speedo, dude, really, get some trunks or something. Yeah. It's just disgusting. Anyway, but that's not all of Spain. There's so much else of Spain there. And part of it is that there's so much else politically of Spain, historically of Spain, but climatically as well of Spain. When people think about Tempranillo, this dominant grape of Rioja, so often I hear from people who my favorite person to mock in this case, forgive me if there are any Texans in the room, I used to live there, I can do that. My Texas farmer friends, you're like, well, I'm down here we're growing some hot climate grapes like that Tempranillo, that's a good hot climate grape. I'm like, dude, you ever been to Rioja? It's like, well, no. It's not hot, okay? This is a typical day in Rio. What we are dealing with outside, that's what I would expect it to be like today in Rioja, and maybe even last month in Rioja. It is close to the Atlantic. We're talking about this spot up here, right? So we're right up here. And if it weren't for the Sierra Cantabrians, the Sierra Cantabria mountain range right here, we'd be exposed to the cold, blustery Atlantic Ocean there. And it has its impact. So what happens in Rioja is we'll talk about certain vintages being an Atlantic vintage and certain vintages being a Mediterranean vintage, a la down here as the winds blow up this way. And that's what we'll describe differences in vintages often by just referencing the ocean. And then, again, I think that part of what makes the place fascinating and part of what informs traditional Rioja winemaking is what I like to describe here as the ancient and the modern. These are 12th century graves that were discovered about a century ago, and it's right outside of Bodega Remediuri. In fact, they didn't even know about them for centuries. They cleared away some brush to open up the front space of Remediuri, and lo and behold, these were here. And the only reason that this is the picture and not the picture where I crawled down into one of the graves and told my friend to take a picture is because my friend wouldn't do it. He was like, "You're creeping me out, stop." And some of the graves are like child size. It's totally creepy. We know nothing about these graves. Who dug them, why they're here, how long they've been there, none of the above. There's a lot of them. Yep, you can see the little chapels. I mean, it's wow. But the ancient and the modern coincide here. Now, this is this Mantible Bridge here is right next to Bodegas LAN. And it's fun for me to talk about LAN in particular because I've been talking about Spain and teaching about Spain for decades, in all frankness. And I took this picture probably in the early 80s. And it was fun because I took the picture and then ran into the owner of the vineyard, which it's next to, and we'll be talking about that vineyard here shortly. And I was like, oh my God, that's a Roman bridge. And then I guess, see, it's probably a Roman bridge. No one knows for sure, but yes, a Roman bridge was here. We know that. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, it's like still standing. I mean, the thing is like still in one piece. I mean, they look at the engineering here that they put together a couple thousand years ago, and the thing's still standing. And obviously, with the trees on top of it and everything, nobody's really been taking care of it. You should put this on the label, Jake. You should put this on the label. And he was like, we have a lot of Roman bridges. But having said that, here we are with Bodegas LAN, and now the bridge is starting to show up on the label. So maybe it is cool after all. Here we are in Santiago de Compostela, the end point of the pilgrimage that devout Catholics have been doing in this part of the world for 1,000 years or so, ever since the finger bone of St. Joseph was recovered in a coffin off the coast of Spain. Yeah, that happens in 1200 whatever, but not for me here to pass judgment on anybody's religious beliefs. It started something which is still going on today, and it is actually a pretty cool looking church as they go. That was rebuilt in like 1910 after the previous one burned down, but they did a nice job with it, I think. And so pilgrims line up to go in, pray in front of the shrine. A lot of these pilgrims have walked the entirety of the pilgrimage all the way from, you can actually start in Central Europe if you want to, but most people start in France and take the walk across and dress funny if they need to. But having said that, the modern is so important to what has happened to Spain as well. Though I probably don't need to wax at too great a length at the political history of Spain, but to remind you that this is the place where the Nazis won. Put it like that. Sorry. The fascists basically won the phalangists, and it was a military dictatorship until 1975. They were allowed to sit out World War II neutral. Yeah, tell that to the good people of Guernica, where the Nazis kind of did a practice bombing run, and that's why Picasso did the tapestry, la 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 la. Anyway, this place, Bilbao, was a backwater when the Guggenheim went in there. Now, much of Spain was a backwater, frankly, because it was a pariah amongst nations. It was, up until, as I say, 1975, this fascistic state, military dictatorship, well, yeah, I don't need to wax on any further on it other than to say those wounds are still relatively fresh. It still occurs that somebody will be doing construction and they'll unearth some bones and they'll suddenly find out there are like 3 bodies buried here. And now that, everybody has to come in and do the, why are they here? And usually what happens is somebody will say, oh, we talked about this, everybody knew they were here somewhere. There were 3, partisans, freedom fighters, whatever you want to call them, who were taken off and executed by the Phalangists during Franco's era, and they were buried here. And then somebody will often come along and say, no, that's not what happened. As a matter of fact, our grandfather, that's probably our grandfather's bones because he was a Phalangist, but he was working for the government, and he was murdered by the partisans, and they were buried here, and it just turns into this big thing of whose monument do we put there, who actually was there. I mean, until recently, the president, really, of Galicia, the northwest portion of Spain, was an ex-Phalangist. He was a member of Franco's party. So this is still rather fresh stuff. And during that time, they were considered a pariah amongst Western European nations. And so, important for our purposes, all the stuff that happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s with wine changing forever, and probably most important amongst those changes, those discoveries, were the adoption of stainless steel, of anaerobic fermentation, or at least temperature-controlled fermentation and maturation of wine. All that bypasses Spain. It bypasses Portugal to some degree too. It bypasses certainly southern Italy, but it catches on fire pretty quickly. Here in Spain, it took a little longer. When Franco dies, it is expected. He's kind of a typical dictator. He didn't really set up who was behind it because as far as he was concerned, he would live forever. And it almost seemed like he did. And so he finally dies, and here's one of those moments where the monarchy saves the day. The king was expected to appoint another generalissimo as the next generalissimo, presidente. And he didn't. He said, we should try the democracy thing. And they did. And Spain exploded in a cultural, here we go. Bilbao in Guggenheim, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao to me is just this great emblem of that. Because Bilbao in the early 80s was a backwater. There was nothing to go there for. It had been the site of a lot of military bombings and that sort of thing during that the Civil War. And then the Guggenheim decides they're going to build a museum there because they're being given a shit ton, that's the official word, of money by the Spanish government. And I rolled my eyes because I'm like, oh yeah, Guggenheim's moving into South America. They're going, yeah, and their collection. And, when it finally opened, I'm doing the same thing. I'm like, the collection here is really not that good. The Guggenheim is obviously stretched so far, but the building is so awesome. Oh my God. It's like, sculpture's nice, okay, but the building, so it's Frank Gehry at his best. And then there's Puppy. I'm sorry, Jeff Koons, I thought he was a Hackman artist. He does the basketball, golden basketball, and Michael Jackson's, and did the videos with his, famous porno queen wife and ex-wife. Now, and then he made Puppy. And the first time I ever saw Puppy was in New York City. It was there first. It's a 40-foot puppy made of flowers, and it was right in front of the NBC building, beautiful towers there, very Art Deco looking, and this guy there. Well, now Puppy has a permanent home. Puppy has a permanent home here right in front of the museum, and it's just, I'm sorry, that's awesome. Okay, and I'll shut up about Puppy. Clearly, not everybody gets off on Puppy as much as I do. There. I think it's just awesome, that's all. Okay, and then there's El Bulli. El Bulli is now gone, I get it. Ferran Adrià, the great chef, is flying his trade in other places now. His brother's doing great stuff. Clearly, I enjoyed my time at El Bulli. That's just me trying to make the bulldog face. Bulli was his bulldog. And so that's why that's the insignia of El Bulli. But it was, once El Bulli happens, it's a landmark change, I think, in cuisine. That from that moment onward, in my view, every kid I talk to in the back end of the kitchen, they're like, before that, it's like, hey, I need to do a stage, man, in the Rhone. Do you have any connections? Bocuse, and I'm always like, no, dude, I don't have no connections. It turned into, now I'm going to do a stage in Spain. And whether it was El Bulli, everybody wanted to do a stage there. The kitchen was full of people from every country, all so excited and pumped to be there learning from Ferran Adrià, or whether it's Arzak or Berasategui or whomever, any of these great, brilliant chefs who brought us, it's true, foam, it's their fault, okay? But that's, you know, they did other stuff too. Caviar eggs made of, you know, green beans, whatever, you know. So, enough said. Okay, so what I'm trying to counterpose is this kind of where Spain is still at to some degree, but now moving on beyond. This is how 90% of the Spanish wine is bought and consumed. You get your, you know, you jug, it's like a growler, you know, the brewery, you get your jug, you fill up your rosado on the rack, and your Tito, your red on the left, and take it on home. That'll get you through the weekend, right? Unless you have company coming over. Take 3 growlers, right? I mean, that's seriously, this is how wine was done. And it's so funny because we always talk as a culture, particularly in America, we always talk, oh gosh, if only people would treat wine like they do in Europe. You know, if only people understood that wine is just a daily beverage. That's all it is, and not make it so precious. Really? Because that's what that looks like, okay? Seriously, in some ways, we have it kind of right. It's special to us. We get it. We know that somebody could have a, you know, that one of these bottles here costs $100, and one of them costs a lot less than that, and we have expectations on that. And much of Spain, in my view, still views wine like this. Now, it's changing. There's no question that it's changing, but that's how it was until very, very recently. And what changes to me is what really happens in Priora. But just so you know, so this is the little shower stall of the retail store that they repurposed for filling up wine. But it's a modern place because that's right next to it. Okay, it's just right across from the shower. Now you can buy a 5-liter box. Okay, anyway, so there's the bridge of Manquille. As you can see, it doesn't go all the way across the Ebro anymore. That's been a long time. We're not even sure, as I said, is it a Roman bridge? Was it rebuilt in the 12th century, 10th century, 8th century? A lot of mysteries around it, but it is this juxtaposition to me of the ancient and the modern that makes Spain so fascinating, really, really fascinating. And one of the things that will happen as we go through Rioja is that we'll see that, at least for the moment, Rioja still represents a moment in time that has been wiped away from the rest of the world. A way of looking at wine that is frankly 19th century and might be 18th or 17th or 16th century. It might be even earlier than that, I don't know. But it is certainly 19th century thinking, juxtaposed with Ultramont, because they've made those leaps, but they made them so late in life, and they've made them so quickly. It's like Italy on steroids, because Italy, again, in the 70s was pretty much whatever, and then it's like, whoa, look out. And Spain, to me, is this thing. And if you've been paying attention, there are new brands, new labels, new regions, new grapes every time you turn around in Spain. They've always been there, but now we're discovering them. And so to finish the story off, if you will, is to focus back on Rioja as a region. Because all this modernity, I think, comes to a head in Rioja primarily. And Bodegas LAN is going to be my way into that. So there's Bodegas LAN itself. Check out the soil. It is one of those places where as soon as you see the soil, all the rocks, you just go, yeah, you can do it here. This is a good place. I like this place. And as you can see on the right, on the left, you can see the Bodegas LAN shed back there. On the right, what I was really doing there was I'm just here to eat goat. Okay, I'm sorry. The rest of you, there is no goat for you. I ate it all. But it was really eating goat in the vineyards, burned over the cuttings from the vines. It's kind of and you're free to hate me. I'm sorry, okay? I did it. So, how are you doing on the tasting thing? Because I'm not observing a lot of drinking. So,
we're waiting for you.
No, you can't wait for me. I never shut up. It's like, you must drink without me and make your mind up. Okay, well, our little booklets here. Hashtag Bodegas LAN. Oh, sorry. Our little booklets here. I'm using it. Yeah, here we go. Okay, here we go. Have in them your wines. So as you flip about halfway through, you'll come to Crianza. And LAN Crianza is what the header means to say up there. That's the 2014. That's in glass number 1. And as you can see here, it's 95% Tempranillo and 5% Maduelo. And we'll talk about those grapes in a little more detail in a second. There's the specs on it. And as you turn each page, you'll see the specs on each of those wines. So, in fact, under those circumstances, you've been robbed of a tasting long enough. Shall we just do a little group tasting here? LAN, glass number 1, the Crianza. Any thoughts on what you smell in there? What do you get?
Cherry.
Cherry! What kind of cherry?
Bing.
Bing cherry? Black cherry?
Yeah.
Sun-dried
You can smell
cherries?
this.
Oven-dried cherries? Is it like cherries macerated in a bowl full of brandy? A little of that too? But is it more red cherry or more black cherry?
Black.
How many say red? Red. How many say black? Black. How many never raise their hands in public? Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's a little of both. I mean, for me. If you want to get a little crazy, here's my glass. If you want to get a little crazy, let's pick up glass number 5. Now that's black cherry. That's some serious black cherry in that one. You see how we really move towards black fruits. So what we're going to see as we go through here, in some ways, not completely 100%, but in some ways we're going to go from red fruits to black fruits. And darker and darker and darker. As these wines get bigger and bigger, and I would argue, more and more modern. Because this is kind of the theme that I'm trying to sing. But let's start off by just explaining very quickly. So LAN, founded in 72, is named after the 3 political provinces of Rioja, which are Logroño, Álava, and Navarra. Navarra, if you know, as a wine region, it's true. Navarra, as a political region, encompasses part of Rioja, as well as the Navarra wine region. So, hence, the understandable confusion if you're on that. And LAN is interesting in so much as they use, obviously, French and American, because that's traditional in Rioja. Indeed, traditionally, Rioja was only American. Now, the reason for that is pretty simple. Spain, we forget about this conveniently with our English language adoption and our hostility towards another language. This was a Spanish continent for a long time, okay? The Spanish came here first, really. Let's think about that. They really did. And they kind of, founded it, and they kind of got things started, and they kept control of South America and Central America, ceded control of North America eventually, sold off their chunk, but had so much ownership here that they were shipping goods back and forth a lot. And you ship goods in the 15th or 16th or 17th or 18th or up until the 19th century and slightly beyond in oak, in barrels, because barrels are easy to move. You can fill one up and, it can weigh, a full barrel of wine weighs 400 pounds, 475 pounds, what have you, depending upon the size and all that stuff. And yet, because it rests on a single cylindrical point, one person can roll it uphill while having a conversation about the game last night, So it remains actually a very important part of winemaking, but primarily it was just a way to move stuff, and it had been so since Roman times. Now, the Spanish, therefore, got very used to using American oak, shipped American oak back and forth in the form of barrels that they stuck stuff in, and then they would reuse them, of course, as any reasonable person would do. So the French oak thing is a relatively new thing there because they cost about 4 times as much as an American oak barrel does, because American oak is a tight enough grain that you can saw across the grain and it won't leak. But European oaks, if you saw across the grain, the barrels will leak. So you have to split them on the grain, and that means there's more left over. Hence, your barrels cost 4 times as much when you buy them from a European producer as when they're made from American oak. So American oak was the smell. And I'll come back to glass number 1 and say, because when you smell that glass, think of lumberyard. Think of, if anybody ever built balsa wood models, I'm totally dating myself now, but old guys like me, we carved out balsa wood models, anybody? No one? Okay, thank God, there's a few people still go I remember that stuff. Go into a Michael's sometime and buy a piece of balsa. If you want to know the smell of American oak, and go, that's the smell of American oak. But it smells like sawdust a little bit, doesn't it? Like a lumberyard, like sawdust. That's because we sawed the staves, so we can smell the sawdust, the leftovers. Actually, that smell shows up in the wine. Now, when we get to glasses like glass 7, there ain't no American oak in that thing. I'm sorry. They say there is, but it's that's French oak. That's bright, beautiful vanilla. That's toasty. It's with coffee and chocolate and things like that. And you can make your American oak into that, but it's always going to have a little bit of that sawdusty thing going on too. So, and then it says Caucasus or Russian barrels. This is a fun thing about LAN as well. LAN actually uses Russian oak barrels, and they admit that they use Russian oak barrels. And there's nothing wrong. It's the Seinfeld thing. Not that there's anything wrong with it. because there's nothing wrong with it. Here's the thing that I find funny about the whole Russian oak thing is we don't know how many French oak coopers are using Russian oak. We just know there's a lot. And if you ask a French oak cooper, do you use Russian? No, I would never do, but my neighbor, he does it all the time, you know. And you go over there and you ask the neighbor, he says, no, I would never do this, but he's a bastard, he does it all the time. And the reason is because it works. It's fine. It's very useful. It's a good oak for aging, gentle aging of wine. And as we'll see, the methodology, the thinking behind LAN and behind Rioja in general is to still treasure and honor this idea of long aging and barrel. We'll return to that. And then hybrids where we mix the woods together, which I think is kind of crazy, but kind of cool too. So here we go. Here's LAN. And as best I can, I'll put it here on the map. Now, let's dig into Rioja a little bit. By the way, they keep drinking. Glass 2, glass 3, glass 4. I think I'll join you. My 2 is corked. Anybody else?
Yes.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Here's who you can blame.
Oh, wow.
I tested it. I don't know what to tell you. Other than we can get another one. Last 2. You know what? There's only a few of us who will have a corked wine because it was the last bottle poured. So don't freak out on it. Can you pour us like 5 glasses of number 2?
There's some up here.
Some of ours are
Well, I think my table was corked. I think you guys
I'm very sensitive to cork, so that's why I think it's funny. Yeah, I get a very sensitive, I get a very strong, but yeah, no. I can smell it.
Yeah, actually, like I said, the only problem's here is my table. You guys are good. I'll smell that one too. Let's check.
At least that's what I smell.
Make sure we're good. Yeah, it's corked. So, okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, just a little bit. Bummer. Anyway, okay, so we'll get these. We have 6 plus 5. Okay? Anyway, so, my right. Going back to Rioja.
It's really
Not to worry too much about this, but you guys are okay. So Rioja is, and this is a matter of some debate. So most of us continue to say,
Right here.
oh yeah, right here. Thanks, Steph.
Thank you.
Most of us continue to say that Rioja as a region is known as Rioja because it's the Rio Oja river. The main river, however, because the Oja is over here, but the main river is the Ebro. And the Ebro River is the primary marker for Rioja, but other wine regions as well, as you move throughout north central Spain. Now, we break the region down into these sub-regions, Rioja Alta, Alavesa, and Baja. Alavesa, is this one better?
No, I don't think so.
Oh,
It's worse.
Yeah.
oh good.
Just saying.
Yeah, this one's worse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's TCA.
Yeah, the first one was actually
Better.
very perceptive.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, that one's fine.
We got it.
Yeah,
Right here.
This is the bad.
What fun we're having!
This is cool. At least I'm noticing it.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, well, better go
Oh,
fast.
here we go. I got a winner. I got a winner. Yeah.
Right. So you guys work on, everybody else work on 3 and 4. They're going to get caught up when they get. I'm going to tell you about Rioja. So Alavesa is references one that is part of the Alava region or province, political province. That's one of the reasons it has that name. But it tends to be differing in character. So you can see Baja's here in orange, Baja's here in red, Alta is here in orange, and then this purple area is the Alavesa. And it's broken up in that fashion politically, but it's also, as we'll see, a function of the soils and the place itself. So now you can see right here, you can see the River Ebro and the River Oja here, Rio Oja, sorry. And let's move on, there's Alta. And then finally, down here, a little lowly, but very large in size, Baja. Most books will tell you, well, Baja's not very good, and Alta's the best, and Alavesa is the second best. And I would say that there's a word for that. What's that word? Bullshit. Yeah, bullshit. Yeah, because it's just not true. For one, okay. back to the history lesson for just 1 second. There's a guy named Alvaro Palacios, okay? Alvaro and his family has property here in Baja. He's arguably the most famous winemaker in all of Spain, and he continues to grow and make wines in Baja. So how bad could it be? I'll digress one more time just to kind of put the story in perspective. So if we go back to, it's about 1985 or so, and Alvaro and his winemaker, his family's winemaker, I should say, and his viticulturalist, they take a drive down to an area that's about 3 hours away called Priorat, which is down in a different area. I'll show you. I think most of you kind of know where it is anyway. It's pretty close to Barcelona. And they wander around and they take some, pictures, and they buy some property, and they rent some space, and they buy some vineyards, and they start making wine. And the first wines come out in 1989. And I remember when this happened, because I read about it in the Wine Spectator, there's a little thing, and I just thought, because I looked up their prices, they wanted $20 a bottle. Now, do I look like an idiot to you? Because I am. I was like, no way am I paying $20 a bottle for this stuff. What does Lermita sell for right now? $800 a bottle? $900 a bottle or so? Could have bought the first vintage? Yeah, I'm smart. But the thing is, we all knew Priorat. The wines are overripe, it's too hot, the wines are all oxidized, there's no good wines made there. Well, that's because nobody thought they could make any money making good wines there. So they made the wines that they had made for centuries. Wines that were oxidized, exposed to oxygen, left out to turn into grapes on the vine, and oftentimes made into a kind of an off-sweet style that's actually quite fascinating, called fondazione, but never mind, back on the subject. Sorry. Anyway, so my voice is in my head bothering you because they're bothering me today. Clearly, it's the coffee. Just have the coffee. Right. So anyway, when the wines come out and we all mock them, within a few years, of course, no one's mocking them anymore at all. And now imagine that every other kid in Spain knows this story. That you can go to a region that nobody's paid any attention to, start making wine, apply modern techniques, and turn into a multi-millionaire overnight, like Alvaro and Daphne and Carlos and on and on, right? And of course, it's not overnight. It took them 25 years. But the story sounds better overnight, and it's a deeply motivating mythology. Maybe it's not mythology, but it's a deeply motivating tale of what can happen in Spain. And it's, to me, the single most important reason to understand why Spain has exploded with all these wines, because there are people going, look, could I make a $15 bottle of wine here? Yeah, probably. Could I make a $100 bottle of wine here? I don't know. Nobody's ever tried. Let's see what happens if. And so that motivates everybody. Now, as I say, with Rioja was always there. Rioja was always seen as the benchmark for Spanish wine. To be quite honest about it, back in the day, back in Franco's era, they drank Bordeaux. The rich and wealthy of Spain, they didn't drink Rioja. They sold Rioja to the British, who continue to this day to sell it in their grocery stores for $5.99. They sell their Grand Reservas for $9.99. That's not Grand Reserva. It's why Rioja in some ways is tearing itself apart right now, arguing about what should Rioja be represented by. Clearly LAN, because if you go back to LAN 20 years ago, in the late 70s, certainly 40 years ago, the wines were just the usual. And LAN about 20 years ago, and for me it happened about 10 years ago, did we're going to make serious stuff. We're going to make $100 bottles of wine because we can get paid to make $100 bottles of wine now. And we know we can do it. I've always felt like, of course they can do it because they have the land, they have the soil, they have the grapes, they have these super old vines, and they have the know-how. But once again, if you can't get paid to do it, you ain't going to do it. So here's one of the last little cultural references I'll make to how Spain works. If you go to Spain, don't be surprised that every time you wander into a winery, the owner, who of course will be decked out appropriately, often, not always, but certainly in Rioja, they're usually decked out appropriately. And then you go talk to the winemaker, and she says, or the enologist, and she tells you, and yeah, there's a whole lot of women in it. A story I like to tell about a friend of mine who's not here, so I won't mention her name, Leslie. Anyway, Leslie one time was interviewing for a TV station this young woman who makes wines at Fiaboa, which I absolutely love, probably partly because I think Isabel is pretty awesome, but I'm married, so never mind. Anyway, so but the idea is she's interviewing Isabel, and she's like, Isabel, please tell us what it was like for you as a woman in enology school. I mean, how difficult it was for you as a woman in a man's world like that, in enology school. And she said, well, I think it was much harder on the men because there were very few of them. It was mostly women. She's like, no, okay, wait, 3, 2, 1, let's try this again. Okay, now tell us again. It's fun. She's like, no, it's hard. Anyway, but the thing is about Spain is everything that I told you about, Spain, that mentality that wine is wine, it doesn't matter, you fill up a jug, that still pervades the older generation. And some people my age too, and some people younger than that. And so who filled the void? Women went, I'll do it. And now it's exciting, now it's interesting. So of course, probably it is a good time to talk to the women in the enology school who are going, these men are assholes, they're trying to run us out of here. Because our true colors do shine at some point. I said I wasn't going to get political, but... excuse me, anyway. Right, Alta. So here's the place everybody says is the best. Here's Alaveta, but here's what... It's been doing this today. You forgive me. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, it's okay. We'll get there. There we go. Here's what differentiates one site from another. Now, that's a cut. That's a highway cut in Alta. And what you can see up top is this hard pan of limestone. By the way, you're in wines 4 and 5 right now, right? Because I wasn't kidding when I said I'll never actually talk about the wines. But Ixalan would like it to be otherwise. I promise I will get to them at some point. But let me explain. So there's a hard pan of limestone there at the top. The top soil is just above the frame of the screen. You can see that that's fractured, fissured. The roots can get through there. Now you go down to the next one, that's fractured, that's fissured. But now you get down to this 6-foot level right here. It's about 6 foot underneath the topsoil. And that's, it's going to be really hard for vines' roots to get through that. Okay? So that's what Alta looks like. Alaveta looks like that, only more fractured. Baja, the problem with Baja is, and why everybody says it's a shitty area, when it's not, because Alvaro Palacios, the guy who made Spain famous, or at least wealthy, his family only farms here, is that this level looks like that. So, what are your answers? Well, the problem is that in a hot, dry vintage, your vines just fry. And they can't get through any, sometimes it's like 6 inches of soil. So there are 2 answers there. One is irrigation, which was illegal until about 10 years ago. Now it's legal. It's totally freaking legal. So it's irrigate. The other one is just take a tractor and just rip the hell out of that hard pan, and you're good to go. So those are the 2 answers. And things are fine in Baja. Thank you very much. The other thing that everybody always talks about is the soil itself. That it is alluvial, clay, pebbles, mixed up with ferrous clay, iron-rich clay. And so this is where the sandy clay, pebbly stuff is where the rivers are, and then this stuff is in between, kind of. But if you notice, the soil in Baja and the soil in Alta are exactly the same. Only difference is depth. Only difference is altitude. Lower down, higher up. And then you come to Alaveta, and this is, as I say, this is significant because LAN is situated on some of this soil. Is this limestone heavy stuff. Now limestone, what limestone does for you is it increases acidity, which increases longevity, but it also decreases color, it increases aromatics, but it sometimes makes a slightly lighter, grainier, more acidic, kind of less full kind of wine. So, is it better? Is it worse? Depends on what you like to drink. Anyway, okay, so back to Lantiano. LAN, in this case, the famous vineyard of Viña Lantiano. We've talked about where we're situated at with the bridge Mantible right there, and the vines here. Let me show you a better shot of that. But what's critical about this is that you can get you can get certainly the colder winds, the Tierto from the north, you get the Solana from the south, and I showed you already what the soil, quote unquote, looks like. I mean, these old vines are really, really, really important. They do something here. What old vines do and how we can prove that they do something different is, I have no idea. For me, it's just one of those things you taste it. I've had those moments where you taste a wine and you go, older vines in this one, right? And the winemaker will be like, yeah, that's my old wine. How do we know that? For me, it's like the wine gets richer the longer it sits in my mouth, but I can't come up with anything more than that. It just feels like that. Does that mean you can't make great wine out of young vines? Hell no. I'm planting a vineyard in April here in Walla Walla, so I'm going to be working with young vines for a long time, so they're the best. You know. No, it's just that there are plenty of examples of people who make fantastic wine off of young vines. And most of the time, that's done because the yields are smaller. And then as the yields start to go up again, and the plants get to like the 5 to 15 year age, sometimes, you know, the wines lose concentration a little bit. I've seen plenty of examples where they don't. Who the hell knows? But I will say this. You know, old vines seem to make a very rich wine. Although my friend Pat from Gallo once said, and I thought it was a great comment, he said, you know, Doug, is it that old vines give us great wines, or is it that the great vineyards give us great wines so we let them go ahead and get old? And I was like, you might be right. That might be right. Okay. So anyway, meet the winemaker, like I said. Okay? It's just cool this way it's been. It's been this way for about 20 years. And I at this point, I find it very exciting. I don't mean to, I'm not pandering, I hope. I hope I'm not viewed as pandering. To me, it's a significant character. You know, the culture of wine is to get more diverse and to become more interesting as it becomes more diverse. We're studying all these different regions because of that, I think. You know, I certainly believe that to be true. And culturally, as we diversify, and we're not doing a very good job of it in wine, okay? Let's face it, we're not a particularly friendly culture to people of color, and we need to figure that one out at some point. But at least I see more women in these things. And I think that women probably have other ideas to bring to bear, culturally, aesthetically, flavor-wise, aroma-wise. Not that they're better, you know, I mean, the whole thing of, oh, you're a better taster because you're a woman. It's like, okay, maybe that may be true, that may not be true. I'm still half the buyers, so, you know, it still has to appeal to my palate, too, if you want me as a customer. It's more a matter to me of, can we get more information? And having the same old guys give the information means you're never going to get more information. It's adding new people to the conversation that allows us to learn and grow and enrich, I think, the wines. She is quite a dynamo in terms of her understanding, her technical understanding of what goes on in the vineyards and what goes on in the winery. And as I promised to talk about, what happens in a Rioja Bodega, in a winery in this part of the country, to me, is different than any other place in Spain, especially these days. Because most of the old school, and that is Viña Lanciana right there. That's that chunk. You see how the Ebro River makes this crazy turn, and that's it right there. You can see why this is kind of a pretty special place when you stand there. You just go, oh yeah, I get it. You get the winds to cool things off. You get little micro pockets. This is some of the really old wine stuff here. That's just you know, you get these little pockets where you can do different things here. But anyway. The way we make wine here is several different ways, but let's break it down. So we have Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva, the D12 you're having here. The Crianza we mentioned has American oak to it. The American oak certainly shows. The way that people differentiated between Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva, and to this day that we still talk in these terminologies. It's changing, frankly, legally, but for now we can still say Crianza, okay, 1 year in barrel, 1 year in bottle. Reserva, 1 year in barrel, 2 years in bottle. Gran Reserva, 2 years in barrel, 3 years in bottle. That's enshrined in law. But in truth, up until about 15 years ago, you could buy Gran Reservas that have been in barrel for 15 years. There are still producers that some of us love, like the two sisters that run Lopez de Heredia, that you can buy a rosé that's been in barrel for 8 years. White wines that have been in barrel for 10 years. And I pour them for my friends, and they're just like, that's weird. I'm like, isn't that awesome? It's so cool. It's like, oh, mushrooming and everything. They're like, that's interesting. Can I have some of them? Red wine, please? Okay, I think it's cool. But anyway, here's why. In the 19th century, phylloxera strikes. In the 19th century, when phylloxera strikes, it strikes in the Rhone area. It hits Burgundy. But really where it makes its mark financially is in Bordeaux, because Bordeaux is up and running at that point. It is humming along, all cylinders, a lot of money going in and out of the port of Bordeaux, all those wines there. And by the year, to put a number on it, by the year 1908, I believe this, I used to carry the statistic in my head, 1908, Chateau Latour made 11% of the amount of wine it made in 1850. Okay, and what had happened is the triple scourge, downy mildew, powdery mildew, both from America, and then phylloxera, the last straw, from America. And it destroyed everything, and it took a long time for people to accept and embrace that you're going to have to plant American vines and then graft European vines onto the top of them, and I'm not going down that whole rabbit hole. The issue is the initial response in Bordeaux is, Monty Python, run away, And so they ran across the Pyrenees. And why they went to the Pyrenees is because they went to Rioja. And why they went to Rioja is because they'd been selling them barrels for about 20 years. Nobody else was buying used Bordeaux barrels, but the Riojans did some commerce back and forth. It was just across a mountain range. And so they bought the barrels. So they went there and they started making wine. And they taught the Riojans how to make wine a la Bordeaux 19th century style, in which you don't know when the grapes are going to be ripe. You don't know when it's going to rain again. I mean, you can kind of tell it's going to rain tomorrow, but other than that, you're on your own. So you harvest the grapes before they're ripe because you just can't be sure, especially in Bordeaux. It's going to rain soon. So as soon as it looks like it's blowing up, get out there and pick everything. So everything's underripe. And so when people talk about these amazing wines from the 1860s and 70s that are still drinkable, I'm like, they probably tasted like cranberries and persimmons ground up with citric acid added for the first 40 years, They were just like, But anyway, so what do you do with a wine like that? If you put it in barrel for a long time, some of them soften. Some of them retain their fruit and soften. Everything softens and the acidity becomes something less abrasive, but most lose their fruit. So that special barrel that retains its fruit during that 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years in barrel, we would give it a special name. We call it Gran Reserva. The ones that kind of did that, Reserva. Everything else, Crianza, get it in, get it out. As soon as you can, it's never going to get better. Right? And so this is enshrined in law in Spain because that's that moment they went, oh, okay, that's how we do it. And then, of course, what happens is the Bordelais and elsewhere all figure out how to fix this problem. So they begin grafting and they stop buying those wines. But another factoid I ran into that I found fascinating, in the year 1900, the average number of case equivalents, I should say, being shipped from Rioja to somewhere in France was the equivalent of 4 million cases per month. It was all, I'm sure, very correctly labeled. Don't you think? I'm sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, so that ends. Rioja's finances collapse. They have to go through the whole replanting thing. That happens in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. We're still replanting some areas there. I used to love to show a picture that's taken the vineyard right across the Ebro that's being replanted old style, where you just take a cane and you jam it into the sandy ground. And then, cover it up. Walk away. Our work is done here. When I come back next year, it will have grown roots. And now I just take, my scissors and cut it, and wing, and it's a new vine. I mean, that's viticulture. Up until phylloxera, up until America ruined it for everybody, as usual. Sorry, how do I really fit? American, come on, be nice to me. I'm a real American. I'm just, Anyway, so, long reserve. So, glass number 2, that's the one I didn't get to enjoy. How did you like it? Yeah, okay, I mean, big, rich, those who enjoyed it, that's an 11 vintage. 14, to me, is a little more of a classic vintage. 11 is big, powerful, Mediterranean vintage. We talked about that at the outset, that when you have a lot of influence from the north, we call it Atlantic vintage, and when you, like a 13. And when you have a vintage that has a lot of hot winds coming up from the Mediterranean, that's like an 11 vintage, where the alcohols go higher, the fruit gets more ripe, gets bigger, gets richer, more extracted, and so you have to, as a winemaker, be willing to play sort of back and forth on those, okay? So, glass number 3. Woohoo! Glass 3. How was that? What vintage do we have here? 11.
10.
Oh, 10. Wow.
I thought 3 was fantastic.
Yeah. This is, so in Gran Reserva, and you know, again in your book, you have here the information that you need to know. 24 months, legally, if that's your minimum. Could be longer in some cases, but LAN has, I think, evolved into more of a modernist than a traditionalist. The traditionalists will have their Gran Reservas in barrel, as I said before, for a long time. LAN is trying to make a more international style of wine now, and I think they're better for it. I think the wines are better today than they were 20 years ago. I'm fascinated by wines like this. This is an 8-year-old wine. It's still vibrant, fruity, but It does have a little bit of that funky, mushroomy, kind of old barrel smell in there, old cellar smell. Now, I would just tell you, this one's easy. If I had 11 Reserva and 10 Grand Reserva in front of me and my wife, this is easy. I would be drinking the 10, and she'd be like, why do you drink that? She'd be drinking the 11. She want, if I'm pulling an old Burgundy out of the cellar, she's like, I know you think this stuff is really good. Do you have like a Malbec or something? She just wants nice, easy, fruity wine, and she's not wrong. I'm just saying, there's kinds of wines for all kinds of people, and that's, the kind she likes. And she would like the 11, and I feel the same way as Mike just said. This wine makes me just gotta go. That's what I'm talking about. This is a smell, however, that is not common. And especially when we talk about the traditionalists in Rioja, we don't see wines like this anymore. This is a new release. It's one of those moments. This is how they want that wine to taste and smell. Will it age in the bottle? Oh, hell yeah. I am not very good at keeping great Grand Reserva in the basement because I tend to drink them. But this wine, I have zero problem putting this wine in my basement and coming back in 20 years. What will it be like in 20 years? It'll be a lot more like that. It'll be mushroomy, musty, all sorts of weird fruits and savory elements. Because one of the other elements in Rioja that I find fascinating is a sort of, there's fennel, because wild fennel grows all over the place. So you get these kind of savory, garrigue sort of smells. And I think this is a good one to get it in. It has for me, sometimes a cumin smell. And I don't expect you to buy into this one at all. But I would just say that it was a recent discovery for me that I'd like to reference to people because I have been marking some Rioja by saying, oh, there's a little bit of that cumin note in there. And never could figure out why, because there's no cumin growing there. Okay? But last year, I was wandering around with the winemaker, and we started talking about the flowers that grow around. And we found a few different flowers, and we're looking at the wild fennel. And then he showed me this one flower called, it's called Euchrysium, something like that. Anybody, any gardener out there can go, you mean blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it has a little yellow flower to it. And it's almost kind of a pod as much as it's a flower. In other words, the petals are round. And when you pop the petal and smell it, it's like, that's the smell. It's the cumin smell. And it's like, I can't prove to you that that's where that smell comes from. But it's one of those things about Rioja that I find fascinating is some of that flora is happening in the wine as well. It ain't just Tempranillo, as my Texas buddy would say. I'm sorry, I had to drink some of that because I had been smelling it and it was making me crazy. So, let's move on to D12.
So, Doug.
Yes.
You did say cumin?
Cumin, yes, C-U-M-I-N.
Not human.
I was hearing human.
That's what I heard.
Oh my God.
It smells like human. It could be a really bad smell. Or a good smell.
I knew what he said.
It's crazy. Actually, no, this also references something, and I don't need to insult anyone in the room. However, if you're British, you're about to be insulted. All my British friends always call it Rioja. And I'm always like, it's not Rioja. It's a J, okay? You say ha. You don't put a cat on your head. You put a hat on your head, okay? So I would call it cat. And anyway, shut up about that. But clearly, I was not saying cumin loudly enough because it sounded like my J. Cumin. So, anyway, okay. So glass number 4. This is the 100% Tempranillo wine. And here we are. Yeah, there we go. So we talked about 2010. So now we're in 2015. This is one of those Goldilocks vintages to me. This is just right. It's one of those little Atlantic, little Mediterranean. It all got in there. I think this is super modern, but it's still real. It still has, for me, some of that fennel stuff, a little bit of that sawdust stuff, a little bit of that stuff that marks it as Rioja, and yet. Thoughts on that one?
Is this number 4?
Yeah, number 4. Yeah, the D12.
Where's the 7th bottle?
Oh, the 7th bottle? Oh, is it not in your books?
We've got it. It's not there.
Oh, okay, it's coming. Don't worry. I promise. I'll get you there. Yeah. So, well, let's move on to glass number 5, and you know, let's get serious. Oh yeah, we're missing. That the reason is because we're missing one of our bottles here. That's why you were looking for a 6 wine. Yeah, thank you. That's great, Trish. Let's make sure we have the appropriate lineup here. So while Trish is taking care of that, let's tuck into glass number 5, because we get into the so-called. So thoughts on glass 5. It's time for you guys to talk, and I'll talk a little bit about grape varieties now, because we have that opportunity to do so. We've gone from 100% Tempranillo into Vignalanciano, these specific wines from this specific place, that kind of magic place you saw in the photograph. Clearly, these previous wines include many of the grapes are in those bottles are from this area, but many are not. It comes back to this notion that I described before, that that classic Rioja is a blend of these regions. Single vineyard Rioja is still a relatively new thing. So now we're going to taste glass number 5, which is back to this 11 very ripe vintage. And now we have Tempranillo, Graciano, and Mazuelo. Mazuelo is also known by the name Cariñena down south, or as my Texas buddies call it, Carignan. Okay? Cariñena, yeah, Carignan. And here's the tale about Mazuelo in Rioja. When I first went to Rioja, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, it was Tempranillo all day. It's all anybody talked about. And the idea of single vineyard was absolutely not spoken about at all. But people took Rioja Alta very seriously, and I remember believing, one, that they were lying about a lot of the wines that they made, because I knew some of the wines came from Baja, and yet they would say, no, this wine's 100% Rioja Alta. And then I would ask the winemaker and say, oh yes, 15% Baja. I'm like, well, okay. And that was fine. That stuff happens. And then that continued to get worse. And people would say 100% Tempranillo, and they have Garnacha in it, and Mazuelo, blah, blah, blah. And that has morphed into about 10 years ago. It was, now we talk about Garnacha, we talk about Baja, we talk about the different regions, we like to blend those together. We're making now single vineyard wines that are a great pinnacle, but we love the great blend. And then you'd say Mazuelo, and they say, no, Mazuelo, no, we're not using Mazuelo anymore. And now, if you go to Rioja, I was just there earlier this year. Now, if you go to Rioja, all they tell you about is, I'm blending Mazuelo. It's so fantastic what the Mazuelo does for my wine. And you're like, we've talked about this like 100 times, and now you're admitting it. Because they had it all along. It's just that it was viewed as a lesser grape. And it is, no question about it, a lesser grape in lesser hands. But Mazuelo, Carignan, whatever you want to call it, has a very cherry berry kind of character to it. It's not a standalone wine in general, albeit the Chileans are doing some really interesting things with standalone Carignan. As a blender, it's indispensable. It provides, and the word they always use is fresh. It provides freshness in a way that no other grape in Rioja can provide. It gives you this strawberry, tart cherry, cranberry, even watermelon character sometimes that freshens a wine up. And in a vintage like 11, you gotta have it. You really need the Mazuelo in order to make a well-balanced wine. May I try something? Well, sorry, I gotta stop talking. And that's well-balanced wine. Do you see what I mean? There is that cranberry edge, pull, whatever you want to call it, that tartness right at the end that it describes for me. There's a great term that the Irish whiskey distillers use when they describe great Irish whiskey. If you say what's a great Irish whiskey, they'll say, it's a bit marsh. And by marsh, they don't mean that it came from the moors in northern Africa, even though that's where we did learn to distill. It means it makes you want to drink more. And it's because, in my view, it's because a wine like this is big, it's rich, it's full, and then the tartness comes in. It goes, no, you don't get any more of that. And then I have to do what? I have to go, there's more. I'm thirsty. It's a wine that makes you thirsty. I know that's not for everybody, but that's what I love in a wine. That's my view of balance. Not everybody else is supposed to agree on that. We all have our own view of balance. But that's, to me, what balance is. You have a question, Bethany?
I did. So I
if you couldn't hear, just to describe how you might determine whether you want to use stainless steel, whether you want to use barrels, what you ferment them in, what you age them in, and how that might impact the wines. And stainless steel is in general what people ferment wines in now.
Yeah.
Once again, I referenced some of the old school folks like Lopez de Heredia, where they did that and they went back to their funky old, in fact, a winemaker here I was just talking to last week described them as disgusting, upright fermenters that are a century old. He's like, it's gross, it's disgusting. It's the most disgusting place I've ever been. And I'm like, I love it. It's like, I don't know why you have a problem with it, dude, but whatever. Stainless steel is much easier to control. The temperature control, everything is in control, and you don't have bugs and weird stuff crawling all over the place. Most of us then drain the wines into barrels and let the malolactic fermentation happen in the barrels. That's how it's done here as well. When you drain them into barrels, before malolactic, kind of as it's getting started, long before it, or even let them ferment to dryness in the barrels. These are choices that people make, and it definitely has a difference in texture. It definitely has a difference in the amount of spice that you get, and certainly the barrel that you use. How big the barrel is, in the case of the old upright fermenters, they're as tall as the ceiling, and they're this big around. And so you get no barrel whatsoever in that. What you get are the bugs that grow inside the wood and the oxygen that gets to it. And in stainless steel, of course, what you have instead is the perfect controlled environment. But that's still not perfect. As I mentioned, I'm working on some wine here in Walla Walla. And we had a block of Merlot in a stainless steel fermenter. But me being me, I'm like, pop the tops on them puppies, man. We're letting oxygen get to them. And so the skins will float to the top with the CO2 and form a cap, the chapeau or the cap, whatever you want to call it. And typically you just pump the juice over that, and that breaks the cap up, it floats down, and you don't grow any weird wee beasties on top of that, some weird smells. But me being me, I'm like, no, man, we got to use the pneumatic punch, the punch down. And it's this big, it's like what we did in the small, we have little small fermenters that are like this, half the size of this table, and you can do that by hand. But in these big fermenters that are about the size of this table and come up to another 3 feet up there, we tried to do it with the pneumatic, and it didn't work. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about it today. We were drinking the wine out of that tank, going, I kind of screwed that up, didn't I? And the guy I'm working with is the actual winemaker. Is like, yeah, he said, I think every wine starts out at 100 points. I think that decision knocked him down to at least 95. And I was like, damn. But those are all, as you can see, all of those will have sometimes decisions that are very easy to understand because wood gives you certain flavors and aromas, and then some that are unintended consequences, like we couldn't get the pneumatic punch to push the cap down, it was too tough. And so the cap got dried out a little bit because Doug was trying to be an ideologue about the thing instead of being more flexible and going, pump it over, hell with it. So does that answer the question in too much detail?
Yes and no, because I mean the question was, have you done both and did you like one or the other? So
Oh, and I guess my answer is, it's the old it depends. In a vintage like 11, where everything's very, very ripe, I probably would be okay with the stainless steel pumping over nice and controlled. In a vintage that's underripe, I'd probably be better off with doing something in barrel because I get more oxygen to it that way. And because I need to soften that wine a little bit. That wine's going to be a little too green otherwise. So it depends upon what I'm dealing with. Yes, but it's a really good question because it gets right to the heart of why you do which, Okay, so you can see on the Lampiano Reserva, 37 months aging. So quite a bit of barrel aging time, and it tastes like a baby still. Blowing through these last two wines, unfortunately, all too quickly. Limitada 2015. I'll let you guys tell me what you taste. Cherries! Only black cherries and black cherry pie filling.
Stewed.
Oh, yes, stewed. 8 months in New French, 7 months in New Russian, which tends to be a milder, less overtly vanillin kind of barrel. For me, this is one of those, I get real, I just think this is ultra modern. Comes back to this. If I hand this glass to my wife, she's going to go, now that's what I'm talking about. Why don't you bring me wines that taste like this more often? And I'll just be like, because that's my wife. And if she knew I was talking about her right now, she'd be very angry. But don't tell her. No one tweet that.
You know I'm recording video, right?
Damn it! Is this mic on? Kevin, I'm moving again. I'm angry and I'm impartial! Sorry, excuse me. Okay, but we didn't talk about another grape in here before we move on. We got 4% Mozuelo, 9% Graffiano. Graffiano is a grape that if you went to Rioja 10 years ago, that's all they wanted to talk about. Graffiano this. It's a grape that is very tannic, very darkly colored, has a great deal of intensity to it. As a standalone, there are a few examples that I think are great. But as a piece in there, it's just like it bulks up. It Arnold Schwarzenegger's all your wine, you know? I mean, it really does make this color deeper, aromas richer and floral, and then adds this big, intense, lush fruit to the middle of it. And it's fairly tannic too. But I do think the tannins resolve pretty quickly. And then our last wine is Comen. Now, this is 12% Graffiano, so you can see where we're going with this. The Graffiano is this ultimate kind of big, rich wine that still needs to be, it needs to be part of a blend, not the basis of the blend in general. Comen represents that last part of the story that I wanted to describe to you, which is what we would call the artistic expression, if you will. The notion that everybody, once they realized how much money was to be made at the very top end of winemaking in Priorat, and then in Rioja, and then in Madrid, and then in Mencia, Bierzo, and on and on and on, they decided, how far do I have to push it in order to make a great wine, in order to make the greatest possible wine in my spot. I will do this, however, making it ultra modern. That's the mentality, that's the thinking. To have the international market understand and believe in what we do. Comen was one of the early, that was one of the early adopters of this des artistes, or whatever you want to call it. Everybody has different names for it, but basically it is this top-end expression. And Comen for me was a great realization, because I'm not joking, 15 years ago, maybe I'm trying to remember when the first Comen came out. It was about 15 years ago. I remember as I tasted it, I had it in Spain, and this is closer to 20 years ago. I didn't much like Bodegas LAN. I thought the wines were okay. And I had Comen, didn't know what it was, found out what it was, said, "This is from LAN? Are you kidding me? This is amazing." I was like, what? And then went into to the bodega, started tasting through the wines, and saw, oh no, we have new people here really rethinking this. And this wine, if you will, represented, here's what we would like every wine to think about that we make. Every wine should reflect this kind of intensity, richness, boldness of character, and all that. Now, is that where Rioja should go? I regret, if you will, that Rioja may someday leave behind this old school, this long aging in oak. The Limitada, 37 months, that's pretty cool. That's definitely a long time in barrel. And I think that Rioja is not done growing. They're arguing very much now about the single vineyard idea, and I think the single vineyard idea is finally going to win there. And once again, Bodegas LAN is very much on the forefront of that. So, time's up. And definitely over.
They call out these seven here. Are the other ones whole cluster, or is there a variation?
No, generally speaking, the others are not whole cluster. Some whole cluster is done, and part of that is to get that stem character in there, but you only use stems when they're, at least they and most, only use stems when they're perceived as very ripe. The stems are brown. These are the kind of folks that will actually eat the stems to see how brown and ripe the flavors are, even though I would not recommend that. It's a good way to know.
Can you stay here?
Yeah, I will stay and answer questions, but many of you need to go.
The Cheese of Europe thing is starting in 5 minutes tomorrow.
Thank you for the madness.